Good evening and welcome to the LaRouche Organization Friday Symposium. I'm Diane Sayre, president of the LaRouche Organization, and tonight I will be joined by Dennis Speed, who is the host of LaRouche's Saturday Manhattan Project. So many of you are familiar with him. We are obviously in quite an incredible situation. The inauguration of President-elect Donald Trump occurs on Monday. We hopefully will get to that point without anything major going awry. And we have the nearly secured ceasefire hostage release deal negotiated by President-elect Trump, really graciously and correctly allowing President Biden to be involved in the process in a gesture of goodwill. But I think it's obvious to everyone, and it was said by the Gray Zone founder, Max Blumenthal, in an intervention against Secretary of State Tony Blinken, that this exact deal could have been negotiated, was on the table, ready to go in May. But what was lacking was the pressure from the United States to make it stick. And as a result, tens of thousands of innocent people, innocent Palestinians, lost their lives. There was a conversation today with Helga Zepp-LaRouche of the International Peace Coalition. And of course, I think the obvious question is not merely securing a ceasefire, but the question that was raised at the end of World War II. How do we get to never again? And the crucial aspect of that is Lyndon LaRouche's 1975 proposal, the Oasis Plan. No one should live in a refugee camp. There must be a Palestinian state alongside an Israeli state. But the key question is economic development, ending poverty, greening the desert, a shared mission which creates the conditions for peaceful coexistence. And we had a guest on one of the Schiller Institute conferences from China who said that he thought China would be perfectly happy to assist in the building of this spectacular project. The obvious thing would be for the United States to be involved as well. And along those lines, again, something very, very hopeful, which is that President-elect Trump had a phone call with Xi Jinping of China. And I just want to read Trump's post on this because I think it is actually quite optimistic and exciting. Let me see if I can find it. Not this. Here it is, I believe. Here we go. Yes. So Trump writes, I just spoke to Chairman Xi Jinping of China. The call was a very good one for both China and the USA. It is my expectation that we will solve many problems together and starting immediately. We discussed balancing trade, fentanyl, TikTok, and many other subjects. President Xi and I will do everything possible to make this world more peaceful and safe. And we know that President-elect Trump also had said a few weeks ago that if the USA and China work together, the two leading economies on the planet, that virtually any problem on the planet could be solved. I would add that we should bring Russia into that combination as well, and I think we'll be seeing that soon. So the LaRouche Organization has begun a mobilization to ensure that the nominations of Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence and Kash Patel as Director of the FBI go ahead. And Dennis Speed was one of the people putting that project together. We have a dossier. I'm bringing Dennis on now. And we are getting to members of the U.S. Senate, especially since the former head of the FBI and CIA, William Webster, at the age of 100, crawled out of his hole to say that these nominations should not go through. And we know him well because he was a long time, very dedicated adversary of Lyndon LaRouche. And while I was on a radio program today, and the host told me that she was absolutely certain all of Trump's nominations were going to go through, he's got a Republican majority. I would say with the case of the intelligence agencies, we should absolutely take nothing for granted, and people have to mobilize. But Dennis, go ahead. You may start wherever you want by responding to that or anything else.
Well, I do have a response to that. I just want to make sure of one thing, probably best to do it now, that people wouldn't know, which is that there's been a statement that was been issued by Reverend Munther Isaac. Now, Reverend Isaac pastors the Evangelical Lutheran Christmas Church, I think it is, in Bethlehem. And he's given a couple of pretty effective Christmas sermons the last 2 years called Christ in the Rubble and Christ is Still in the Rubble. And he had a statement that came out concerning this ceasefire. He calls it, Reverend Munther Isaac celebrates ceasefire cautiously. And don't worry if you can't read the text there, I've got it and I'll read it off as a full statement. We have been praying and pleading for a ceasefire for months. Now that it seems a ceasefire is about to take place, I am overwhelmed with mixed and contradictory emotions. To begin with, I am still cautious. I will believe it when I see it. But hoping that the ceasefire materializes, we can't but feel relieved and grateful. Gaza has endured immense suffering with far too many lives lost. At this moment, we just want the killing to stop. I am also grateful for all who will be set free, Palestinians and Israelis alike. I hope and pray that we reach a point in which all captives are set free. While a ceasefire is certainly something to celebrate, it cannot be our goal. This is not a moment to rest. Too many questions are still unanswered. Too many wounds are not healed. Will the rebuilding begin, and especially that of hospitals? Will sufficient food and medical aid enter Gaza? Will doctors and nurses be allowed to enter Gaza and nurse the thousands who need immediate support? Will those who suffered and lost their loved ones find comfort? What about the thousands with amputated body parts? What about the 2 million refugees? Is the ceasefire temporary, or will the fighting and shelling resume? We are left with so many uncertainties and questions about the immediate future, both in Gaza and the West Bank. Moreover, will those who committed war crimes ever be held accountable? At the same time, we can't help but feel angry and frustrated that it took this long. Gazans have suffered a lot. They deserve to simply live in their homeland. Palestinians deserve to live in dignity and peace in their homeland. A ceasefire will not end apartheid. Annexation in the West Bank is already taking place. Our land, ruled by racists, is fragmented and torn apart by checkpoint, settlement, and segregation policies. A ceasefire is certainly something to celebrate and thank God for. Every life saved and every soul set free is something to celebrate. Every life matters. So we feel grateful today, remembering that a ceasefire is not the goal. Will there ever be an end to this 76-year-old nightmare? Let it be our commitment. But let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. So that is his statement. We read it, first of all, because it's his statement. We don't read it because all things in it are necessarily endorsed by myself or Diane, nor by you, but because it's an important indicator of something that's happened, and it's happened before the inauguration, as Donald Trump had stated he wanted it to occur. Again, I think we've been very clear. We ran independent candidates for office, or excuse me, we supported people who ran as independent candidates for office, as we will. And I think the LaRouche Organization has always made that clear from the time, of course, when Lyndon LaRouche himself was able to run for president, starting in 1976, by the way, and then came under the surveillance and scrutiny specifically of the William Webster that you mentioned. It was back in 1982 that William Webster responded to a request by then very active Henry Kissinger, who also just recently died. I guess he was 100 years old as well, to investigate Lyndon LaRouche and our organization. And so for a lot of people who are looking now at what they're experiencing through the hearings, we want to be very clear that the reason that we honed in on these two nominations, Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel, is because we're trying to, let's say, cut right to the chase. We know that a lot of the people in the Congress, for that matter, a lot of people in much of American political life, are blackmailed, and they are afraid of the blackmailers. And the blackmail has often come through the FBI. This is not a new phenomenon. So what we did was we wrote a pamphlet called the Liars Bureau. We'll bring up just a picture of what that is. It was subtitled by us at a certain point: Who wants to block the confirmations of Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel? What are they trying to hide? Now, this was not new material. This was basically just us trying to make this available in a succinct way, not merely only to the investigators, but to you, for the public, to understand why they ought to support this. And we'll just show you what the contents of this. Well, there's a letter transmission. I should first of all say from the president of TLO, which is Diane. That begins the document, and she'll say a few things about what she had to say there. I just want to indicate to you that we divided this into 5 sections. The first one is manipulation of the news media and Russiagate. The second is the neocon alliance with terrorists. The third is election meddling and the Hunter Biden laptop. The fourth is corruption in the Department of Justice. The fifth, the war on whistleblowers. And finally, we have a conclusion: is there a deep state? Now, if you follow Lyndon LaRouche at all, you probably know that we don't have a problem with the idea of the deep state. We wrote a 500-page book about the deep state called Railroad, which covered the case of Lyndon LaRouche and how he was prosecuted and persecuted. And I'll just note for people, by the way, that if you go right now to Alexandria, Virginia, and you go to the courthouse there, the courthouse is called the Albert J. Ryan Courthouse. That was the prosecutor in the case of Lyndon LaRouche. The courthouse was named after him, Albert J. Bryan. I think I may have said Ryan. Excuse me.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at William Webster, who at 100 years old is weighing in on the Tulsi Gabbard and related matters, and then you look at Lyndon LaRouche's persecution Webster, and then that the Alexandria Eastern District Court, I believe that is named after Albert J. Bryan, who persecuted and prosecuted LaRouche. It's important just to understand that for us, this is like a coming full circle. And Diane, I think what I'll do is, rather than just sort of go through all the details, let's talk about this a little bit. I think one thing I want to point out to people who have been questioning, for example, Tulsi Gabbard, right? Judge Napolitano brings up, and actually Helga LaRouche referenced it today, that Tulsi Gabbard seems to be backtracking on her previously very vociferous campaign about the Foreign Intelligence Advisory Act and the sections of it that allow for illegal surveillance. And so people are worried about that. They see that she's done that, and she did do that. And there are flaws in her, there's flaws in Kash Patel. But I just thought maybe you and I should talk a little bit about both your transmittal letter, what she had to say in that and why this is not really, this may be a concern, but it's not something that people should be quibbling around at this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tulsi Gabbard actually sort of embodies what I'm talking about in that letter. She's a veteran. She is an active duty member of the National Guard. She was deployed to Iraq. And what I said in that letter as the president of the LaRouche Organization, but also as a U.S. citizen who has had immediate family members deployed to Iraq in a combat zone, in a combat unit, let me say, it is of great concern that we entered a war with Iraq based on lies. And not only were they lies about the weapons of mass destruction or that Iraq had a nuclear bomb or all kinds of crazy things we were told about missiles that were able to deliver their nuclear bomb in 2 hours or less or something to the United States. But you have people like Nancy Pelosi actually admitting that the House Intelligence Committee, the Gang of Four, knew that these were lies, but they allowed the country nonetheless to go to war. They did not speak out. I think this was the time at which some of our friends, Ray McGovern and others, created the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. I believe their first letter, wasn't it, was written about this very matter.
Yeah.
They knew that there were no weapons of mass destruction. They formed a coalition of former intelligence and military veterans to warn the president, to say this is a lie. What was the result of the lie? 5,000 American troops dead, 32,000 American troops injured, many missing limbs, and hundreds of thousands, if not over 1 million Iraqis dead, millions of people displaced. This changed the face of that region until this day, destabilized it, created a breeding ground for terrorism, all because of that lie. And my question in my letter of transmittal is, are you willing to allow the people who propagated that lie, who told that lie and defended that lie, are you going to allow them to select who is going to be in charge of the Director of National Intelligence and the Federal Bureau of Investigation? Because if you do that, of course, that means you are condemning us to repeat these lies. And these lies in this period in history may actually lead to a war from which there is no return, could lead to a thermonuclear war. This is a very, very serious question. And I think the members of the Senate should think a little bit differently, not about who's lining their pockets, but what they're willing to have on their conscience.
You know, Diane, I'd like you to do something here because you talked there about Tulsi Gabbard and the fact that she's a combat veteran, that is a person that has tried to serve the country and came to serve the country actually under false pretenses, but nonetheless did that. You have family members did that, actually in 2 different wars. And Dennis Fritz, the command sergeant, Air Force command sergeant, who's been very involved with us recently, at least with his writing of his book and some of the things he's had to say about this. You could say something about the other unspoken toll that this is also taken in the United States in terms of veterans themselves and the way the country's been affected.
Well, we have now on average 22 veteran suicides per day. We've heard repeatedly that people returning from the war with PTSD cannot get adequate treatment. And I would say, aside from the horror, I believe it's now 4 times more soldiers or more than that have died of suicide than even were killed in combat. So think about that. But you have people coming back who are now violent because of the PTSD that they suffered, because they were abused, very much the way the Israeli soldiers who have begun coming forward are talking about how they are being abused. They are being ordered to commit war crimes. And if they refuse, then war crimes are committed against them. So you're creating a problem of tens of thousands of young people who are going to have very serious mental health issues, and you have no plan to address it. Neither, I will say, by giving them a positive mission in terms of the reconstruction and development, because I think that would actually do wonders in terms of helping people to make sense of their lives and what they sacrificed for.
Yeah. One thing I want to do because of the pamphlet, but also because of the issues, because we want people to be involved. The citizens can be involved in these hearings in one sense. I mean, you have senators, and the senators are going to vote. And therefore, even if people may be living in states where they think the senators are already prepared to vote for these nominations, it's important to understand what the issues are. And I wanted to take up two, which is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which is the thing that we were prosecuted also under. I should just say something about that in a minute. And then the Foreign Agents Registration, I think, Act, FARA. So first of all, so people are just clear, what we're talking about here is the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, which reads, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Now, a bit of background on this. The reason that this idea of the FISA court, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, this was supposed to be an improvement after Richard Nixon and what came out about the full use of the FBI and the CIA for domestic surveillance. Now, that wasn't due to Richard Nixon. That was due to J. Edgar Hoover. I mean, that had been going on with Americans, particularly, for example, Black Americans like Congressman Adam Clayton Powell, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. I mean, everybody, in the Black community, this was a well-known thing back in the 1950s, 60s. Of course, then there'd also been during the period of the McCarthy era, the FBI had been used in that way as well. So the idea was that you were going to create this act that was supposed to stop that or to improve that. It was called the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Now, what was it supposed to be saying? Saying, well, maybe there's a case where somebody is operating on behalf of a foreign government. And if that's happening, we have to have a way to surveil them, perhaps, or investigate them, because that may be a threat to the national security of the United States. Now, and therefore, although we don't want to have any domestic surveillance, there are cases where we would say that there can be domestic surveillance, and that is a case where somebody is in collusion with a foreign power to overthrow the government of the United States or to, in some fashion, undermine the United States. That's supposed to be what it is. And that's how, by the way, Lyndon LaRouche and his people, and that's what was done by William Webster and Henry Kissinger. They argued that LaRouche was some sort of agent of foreign power. They tried to say it was the Soviet Union, but that didn't exactly work. And they did many things to create a condition. This began through what was called the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board. We're talking here about the years of the 80s.
I want to add one thing on that, because I believe that also part of this loophole on the FISA court was that documents from foreign governments could be accepted to trigger the search. And that, I think, is such an outrage. We are the United States. There might be a foreign government that has a particular interest in undermining us. So they make up some nonsense, send it over, and then that can be used to violate your rights.
Well, that's a very important one, because the argument there, for example, that means if British intelligence agency does a surveillance on an American citizen, then whatever is found in that surveillance can be admitted under the FISA. So in other words, all you have to do is make an arrangement with another foreign intelligence agency if you want to open up a prosecution of an American, even if you can't show that that American actually committed a crime. In other words, maybe you were, whatever you were doing, right? But that's a very important element of it, because it allowed for, people may have heard this term before, the Five Eyes, which refers to the intelligence agencies of Canada, Great Britain, New Zealand, Australia, and the United States. It's actually otherwise called, really, for the cognoscenti who know this, the English-speaking union. But that's a wink, wink as to what that is. And so that there's a lot of, that's why British intelligence, people have heard this many times about the integration of British intelligence with American intelligence. And this is one of the things they do. They swap. So it's not that it's all necessarily even done under FISA. It's done as a practice, but then something like FISA can be invoked against people to go after them. But here's what, by the way, Judge Napolitano said about this entire thing. He said, this is wrong. He says that if you read the Fourth Amendment, this is Judge Napolitano, he says it proclaims, this is from, by the way, an op-ed that he just recently wrote. It proclaims itself to us have, that is, FISA proclaims itself to us have established the only lawful method for surveillance outside of the protections of the Fourth Amendment. This proclamation is itself a profound constitutional error, as all surveillance in defiance of the Fourth Amendment is unconstitutional. And that's a really interesting formulation that he has, because what the judge is saying is that the Fourth Amendment protects everyone, Americans and non-Americans also as well. That's interesting, because that's one of the things that came up in the case of Julian Assange as to why the United States should not have any jurisdiction over Assange at all. He's not an American citizen.
Right. And how can it be charged with espionage? Right? He's not a U.S. citizen.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's espionage to our nation. That's what we're charging him with.
Yeah, the judge, it's an interesting thing for people who are thinking about the 250th birthday of the United States. The judge points out that the Fourth Amendment, quote, was written in the aftermath of British agents executing general warrants on the colonists. General warrants were not based on probable cause of crime, but rather governmental need. And they did not specifically describe the place to be searched or the persons or things to be seized. Rather, general warrants issued by a secret court in London authorized the bearer in America to search wherever he wished and seize whatever he found. The agents ostensibly were looking for proof of tax payments. They were rather and really engaged in spying. They were looking for subversive, revolutionary materials. So it's sort of interesting that that's the origin of the Fourth Amendment in the first place. And when we look at how this was used and is being used now against the citizens, well, everybody, including in this case, President-elect Donald Trump, there's a reason, obviously, that this whole issue has to be brought up. The second thing I'm just going to reference briefly, and I don't think we can bring this up on screen, but I happen to have a letter that was written by former Congressman Bob Livingston. It was printed on January 14th. So that's what is that? 3 days ago in the Wall Street Journal. And it's written to Merrick Garland, the Attorney General. And he says, what he's complaining about is that he, the congressman, has been being the target of an investigation. And he says, "Dear Mr. Attorney General, your time in office won't run out a moment too soon. You will be remembered as a tool in the Democratic Party's strategy of misusing the Justice Department to visit injustice on innocent people with differing political views." He goes on. He says he's 81 years old. He says he was elected to Congress and he served for 22 years. He says, shortly thereafter, I created and ran the Livingston Group. That's obviously named after himself, Bob Livingston. For 25 years, we represented defense, education, energy, health, and corporate clients of all kinds. He says in the year 2022, 2 Federal Bureau of Investigation agents came to my home in New Orleans and questioned me about incidents involving our representation of an international client in 2018. Having nothing to hide, I spoke with them for 2.5 hours. I told them everything I could remember. I told them the truth. They quibbled with me about facts and reminded me of incidents that, for whatever reason, I could not recall. I have been interviewed by FBI agents in the past about varying matters under investigation, never about me, and I thought this was no different. I was given to believe that they were looking only for background information. At the end of the interview, The agents presented me with a search warrant for all my company's records related to their questions. As the lead agent left, she thanked me for my service to the country. But as I read the search warrant, I realized that this meeting was neither benign nor simply for background. The next day, with my wife listening, I called the agent and asked directly, "Am I a target?" To my great shock, the agent said yes. And then he has this paragraph, which I think you want to hear, so it just sets the context to understand why the concern is for the position of Director of National Intelligence and making sure that someone gets in there that isn't part of this secret government network. He says, Congressman Livingston says, "In all my years as a lobbyist, I have bent over backwards to comply with the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA. My company has always filed reports pursuant to the law when we thought they were due. I've repeatedly told my clients we must comply with FARA to avoid any possibility of transgressing the law. The company has employed a full-time officer to ensure compliance. Yet Justice Department prosecutors said on several occasions that I was the target of felony charges. Every day and night for 20 months, I lived with the possibility that the hammer would drop at any moment." Goes on, talks about other things, talks about being interviewed in January 2024. A member of the staff was interviewed. In December 2023, an FBI agent harassed our FARA compliance officer, who himself had been a congressional staffer, so on, says other things. And then it says that it talks about this staffer, David Loney. It says, "Loney was an honorable and decent man, the epitome of integrity and honor. The agent nevertheless told him that if he knew what was good for him, he would talk. Dave was scared to death. He went to bed on December 31st, 2023, and didn't wake up the next day. His family is devastated. My company and I were innocent of all charges. And while I am pleased that this Kafkaesque harassment is over, I am not content to simply shrug my shoulders and move on." I think it's clear what it is that the congressman is asserting. I think it's clear what happened. And I just want to say, Diane, that it's clear to those of us in the LaRouche Organization, as it was clear to you when you first became involved with it, which was at the time of the unjust and criminal indictment of Linda LaRouche and the trial that began on Linda LaRouche in 1987, that it's always been clear to us that the intention of a lot of these prosecutions and persecutions are to drive people to various ultimate actions. That didn't just happen to Black radicals. It didn't just happen to former Communist Party members or real Communist Party members or suspected Communist Party members. It didn't just happen to all sorts of people that were anti-war activists. It's happened and happened recently to congressmen and to the president of the United States, president-elect of the United States until Monday. So I just wonder, given all that, you have any thoughts or observations about how in these days, making sure that these nominations go through, what people should be thinking to do?
Well, I think, one, everybody should be getting in touch with their senator and telling them that they want Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel confirmed, but also underscoring the evil nature of the people who are working against them. I mean, we have had lie after lie after lie, and I really want to warn against complacency, and I also want to warn against people thinking that this is divided among party lines. It has really nothing to do with party lines, except perhaps that the Democratic Party has gone completely fascist, pro-genocide and war. But otherwise, you certainly have some of those people in the Republican Party. And I thought maybe, Dennis, you could underscore this with our little graphic about Liz Cheney, the January 6th investigations, et cetera. And I can pull that up whenever you like.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. This will be useful for people because so that people don't think this is all about past investigations. There's an ongoing investigation of January 6th. Now, so much has been said about this that is so wrong. And those of us, Diane, remember this very well, in January of 2021, we did or tried to present, this was done in conjunction with other organizations, a case around this whole thing that happened around January 6th. And we had various people who wanted to talk about some of the issues that were involved. Everybody remembers what's been said.
Election issues. You mean the
Yeah.
electric frog, as we say. I think
Yeah.
you're allowed to talk about it now, but
Yeah, right. You had to change your language. It was like
Right.
1984. Everybody was
Right.
scared to talk and say
Right.
that the election was in fact stolen. It was being stolen from before Trump got elected, actually.
yeah, exactly.
From
Now, and Hillary Clinton never got persecuted for saying the Russians had stolen the election, even though it was demonstrated not to have been true. And she went on saying that for 4 years and even after that.
Yeah.
But when Trump said that there was evidence of election fraud, it was considered a crime in the state of Georgia because the so-called experts said there was no election fraud. And how dare you say something counter to what the experts said? And somehow that's now become criminal. So so much for the First Amendment. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine. That's fine. It's the right thing. So just so people know, we're going to bring up Liz Cheney on the screen. Get ready. And
you want the picture or the release?
Let's do. I'm thinking about it. I don't know. Let's do the picture. This is a little bit of young children may wish to leave the room.
I'll have to scroll down.
Yeah, you have to get the scroll. You have to get the picture.
There she is.
Yeah, that's good enough.
With her heartless father.
Yeah, right. Which is really the point here. Because you all know that Liz Cheney has tried to make herself out to be this great bastion of morality, so great that she has left the Republican Party, in effect, right, and did to campaign for Kamala Harris, which she did. But that didn't represent anything because Liz Cheney, just like her father, doesn't believe in parties. They believe in power. And what had happened was that there was a danger because of the fact that simply Trump was not the same establishment that these guys were, that he might, and they didn't want Trump stopping the war machine. So here's what there was. It was an October 15th, 2024 press release. We'll go to that now. And this is issued by the U.S. Congress Committee on House Administration. And you get that? Yeah, and we'll see that here. Yeah. New texts reveal Liz Cheney communicated with Cassidy Hutchinson. She was a witness for the January 6th. Cassidy Hutchinson about her select committee testimony without Hutchinson's attorney's knowledge, despite Cheney knowing it was unethical. Now, we're not going to try to unpack this entire thing for you here, but you see the date there of October 15th. And we just want you to understand what this meant. This Cassidy Hutchinson had been a former White House aide who had served as an assistant to Chief of Staff Mark Meadows during the Trump administration. Okay, so now she testified actually in front of this committee 5 times. If you go try to look this up on the internet, you will be very hard pressed to figure out that she testified in February and March 1st. Those 2 occasions, right? And then there's a third testimony. Now, that's the one that everybody likes to talk about in the media, and then from there forward. The reason I'm telling you this is because Liz Cheney was serving in the investigations of January 6th and knew that this lady had an attorney and was represented. But what she did was she used somebody by the name of Farrah Griffin. Now, Farrah Griffin is an intermediary. I'm kind of trying to avoid a lot of details here because I just want to try to get to the point. To go talk to Hutchinson and basically convey nicely, shall we say? Oh, there we go. You got them right there. The emails and a series of emails. So I reached out to Liz. She agreed to keep our confidential comments totally confidential. Can't quite read it. She said she advises you. She admires you, excuse me, and could tell that you wanted to do the right thing. So now this is Farrah Griffin talking to Cassidy Hutchinson. So let me just say that what happened in this email is that um, she says, well, but Liz, she can't really ethically talk to you without him, meaning the attorney. But what she suggests is a follow-up with you, with your lawyer, that she and Dan George can lead. Probably can do without other members and Tim. Now, what is happening? What's going to happen here, without us going through all of this, is that back during the day of this actual testimony, in other words, which is 2022, what they want to do is to kind of create a situation where Cassidy Hutchinson is going to dump her lawyer, which she did. Now, it's not that all of this is precisely necessarily illegal, but what is done is to communicate without the knowledge of Cassidy Hutchinson's lawyer that Liz Cheney has a kind of an interest in Cassidy Hutchinson, who, by the way, is now doing very well for herself financially.
Getting her to change her testimony to incriminate Trump.
We could, I suppose, just put it that way. All right. And so from that point, and you can find all kinds of sensationalist headlines. This is the thing where Trump supposedly lunged at the wheel of the driver to try to stop, and all those things that were said about. She's the source of several of what are called uncorroborated charges, right? To be specific, here's what the Congressional Committee said. In her May 17th, 2022 transcribed interview, Hutchinson testified to a series of uncorroborated and unverified stories that conveniently fit the Select Committee's narrative that President Trump is dangerous and solely responsible for the events of January 6th. Okay, so that's there from their press release. So importantly here, this quote, these new text messages began to come out in October of this year. So what we are going to wish to see from whether it's Kash Patel or in a different way, perhaps from Tulsi Gabbard, which is also possible, interfaces of the layers of operations that have been underway, not merely around the presidency, not merely around Trump, but around all of us and those of us who've been trying to do something, particularly, of course, in the period of the Russiagate on. But in our case, of course, going back to the case of Lyndon LaRouche, certainly matters like the Kennedy assassination, many other things that people have wanted to know about. Yes, that's another possibility. But even in terms of the Tulsi Gabbard nomination, let me just say one thing, and that's the final thing, Diane, I have, is if you find among those 17 intelligence agencies a pattern of collusion against the president of the United States, it is incumbent upon us to seek the prosecution of those individuals to the fullest extent of the law. And that's what Patel has said he would be committed to.
And that's why Biden has done this unprecedented thing of preemptive pardons.
Yeah. Have they actually happened yet? Did they happen?
He did another 1,500 apparently yesterday. I don't know if they were all preemptive or.
Yeah. I haven't seen them yet, so I don't know. Yeah, right. Yeah. And of course, now that one, of course, is going to be interesting because people are going to obviously presume you're guilty if you got a preemptive pardon.
Well, why don't you think about which department store you want to rob and get a preemptive pardon, so then you can go rob the store or whatever it is that you.
Yeah. So it's going to be an interesting. Just to say finally, look, the most important thing about both Gabbard and Patel is who they are not. They're not part of what people have called for a long time the deep state apparatus. We called it the Get LaRouche Task Force because we knew what it was. We saw what it was. Webster was in it. Judge William Webster was in it. And a lot of other people were in it. Andrew McCabe was in it. And several of the people, Christopher Wray was in it. And the various people who, we got to know and not love in Leesburg, Virginia, because of their involvement in these things. And so I think it's certainly a hopeful sign. First of all, that they were nominated, and second of all, that the American people, many of the people that listen to this show and followed you and know about various other things you've done, we're taking action to really finally bring this to light.
Well, I just want to say a couple things about it, because as with actual assassinations, and I think political assassinations or character smears, they're done. I mean, there's a mafia kind of tradition where you do things in revenge. You do it because someone did something. But I think with a high profile thing where you're actually engaging in criminal activity, whether it's to bump someone off or destroy their reputation with lies, which is supposed to be illegal. There used to be lies against libel and slander, is because of what they might do. And I think if you go back to the ceasefire, which is now occurring, or that Trump just put out this tweet saying, I just had a great conversation with Xi Jinping. What you're seeing is the potential for a completely new order, which Helga LaRouche has been calling for, which is that you're really not going to end these conflicts unless mankind advances to a new paradigm, which is based on certain principles, not only the respect of the sovereignty of nations and each nation equally, as each individual has an equal right to sovereignty, or as we say in our Declaration of Independence, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but a whole new order of relations among nations, which commits to the principle that every single nation has a right to economic development, that every single child born on this earth has the right to grow up not living in fear of being bombed, not starving to death, not drinking contaminated water, but with the potential to develop their innate talents. And if the United States were to return to its anti-colonial founding principles and work with China and Russia and the BRICS process, that is the final nail in the coffin of this bankrupt, dying, criminal enterprise known most recently as the British Empire, the Anglo-Dutch oligarchy. Frankly, it goes back to Rome, it goes back to Zeus and Prometheus, and they will do everything they can to stop it. And that's why it's so urgent that you have people in place who have demonstrated a willingness to risk their reputation, of both of these people have, to take risks that other people weren't willing to take in order to stand up for truth.
Well, also what is happening, right, is that you're finally beginning to get some people into positions who are going to be trying to deal with the threat apparatus, which is being used against everybody else. So in other words, there's all sorts of people that might want to do the right thing. They never get to it because they're either terrorized, and therefore terrified, or they reject being terrified, but they're eliminated. And then people don't know, right? And that's what happens. And people are, and we don't want either one of those things to happen. You referenced, for example, President Trump having his conversation with Xi Jinping. Well, conversations among presidents should be privileged. They just like a Second World War. Roosevelt's talking to Stalin. He's talking to Churchill. Okay, a lot of people think Stalin's a monster. Some people think Churchill's a monster. I'd argue that you have a good case in both cases. You still had to talk to them.
Right.
Yeah, right. And Biden didn't talk to Putin for 2 years. Now, frankly, I don't consider Putin a monster at all. I think, in fact, the whole point is he's a person, as one person said, as Arestovich from Ukraine said, Putin is the most pro-Western Russian leader in the last century, which is a pretty interesting thing coming from somebody from Ukraine who's not particularly in love with Putin, and just makes that observation. But people have to be protected, and the surveillance state. This is how J. Edgar Hoover used to use it. He used it against the Kennedys, famously used it against the Kennedys, and against King. And he thought he could do that. And frankly, that's what these people in these intelligence agencies have done. What Schumer said was true. Trump defied them, and in such a fashion that he's now going to be reelected. So this is a moment for all of the rest of America, and for that matter, people from around the world, to sort of show up, because we could see a real fight for the first time, so that America can do what you said. It's been away from its revolutionary tradition for a long time. It's now going to be having its 250th birthday, which I would keep saying starts on April 18th of this year, because that's Paul Revere's ride, and then Lexington and Concord that come right after. So, there's no reason to postpone or to delay the celebration. Why not celebrate by getting these people nominated, and then let
Right.
justice be done, though the heavens fall, as they say.
Exactly. So I would just like to wrap up by once again showing people how to find this dossier on the LaRoucheOrganization.com website, the Liars Bureau. And it's here, and you can see here, if you click there, you can print the PDF. You can get a link to send to your representative. And you should call your senators. It is very, very urgent. Please don't take anything for granted. And just let me say, to be very clear to the cynics among you, or people who wish to say, oh, those LaRouche people, Trump is terrible and Tulsi kissed the AIPAC ring and it's all, no, the point is you. We are not telling you to sit on your rear end and just let anything happen. We are telling you the level on which the fight has to occur. If you've seen the list of people that Kash Patel wants to investigate, you will understand that once those investigations begin, they're going to find out a lot of things which are going to indicate much more that Lyndon LaRouche was right than they might expect. And I think we have to go there. This is not a time to be passive and on the sidelines. Not only is it not clear that we're going to avoid thermonuclear war, although I think President-elect Trump definitely doesn't think we can survive a nuclear war, unlike certain other characters in the Pentagon and elsewhere. But can we move mankind to something better? And can people be moved to fight for the good with at least 10% of the passion that these evil lunatics like William Webster, who's still sitting around at the age of 100, are fighting for evil? I think that's the question. And I would urge people to sign up for a membership in the LaRouche Organization. Sign up for, if you do a monthly donation of $10 per month or more, you will get the daily alert, LaRouche's Executive Intelligence Review, and you can have access to this intelligence every day. So that's what I have. Anything else you'd like to add, Dennis?
Just that people should get the Liars Bureau, get it out to everybody you know, get a big discussion going about this process, get involved. And that way you don't have to ask the question, how can I trust that these people are going to do the right thing? Because you'll be doing the right thing.
Exactly. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining. And next week, when we meet again, the United States will have a new president. And hopefully we will have a brighter future than we've had for some time, with a lot of effort.